Good morning and welcome to Alumni Week. A very special welcome to the few alumni that have arrived already, and over the course of the next few days, we anticipate about 160 alumni joining us here, all culminating at the end on Saturday with a banquet that we're doing for them. But we wanted to invite them in a week where we had lots going on, and it's the fact that there's Cougar hockey and Clipper hockey, that there's basketball, that there's opera scenes, that there's the opportunity for some seminars and a couple chapels, I think is really, really important. And one of these opportunities we have to look back on the story that God has written in this place, not just from some of the panel discussions, but from today, this morning, from the very origins of this place. Joshua, this passage in Joshua speaks so clearly about memory, about the memorial stones, and I think it's really, really helpful for us, and that's where I'd like to start this morning. I gave a title to Kevin, I believe, entitled "Joining a Story God Started Over 87 Years Ago." And when we are in our student worlds, when I was a high school student here, when I was a college student here, it's real easy to only know the narrative from the last couple years of what you heard from older students, and then just like the whispers of like the ghosts in the building about what used to be, and only really focus on what's right now, what you're experiencing. And the Israelites, as they crossed the Red Sea, as they got too close to Canaan, as they crossed the Jordan, and Joshua was told to do this with these stones, I think it gives us a nice example of what we'll spend the next 22 minutes here doing. So open your Bibles back up to Joshua 4. If you know this passage, of course, they have crossed through the Red Sea already. Joshua sends the spies to take a peek on Jericho. They meet Rahab. Rahab hides them and secures their safety in exchange for safety of her family when Jericho clearly falls. And something interesting that she says in this is down here in a little bit before then. I will. How about I summarize it instead? She basically says, I will help you because word has spread across the entire countryside that your God is the true God, and he has decimated and it helped you escape and cross through the Red Sea, and we are terrified. The men are not willing to fight because they can see clearly that they will lose. And these spies took this back to Joshua, being able to say this from Rahab. And then they go through this terms and agreement situation, which I think is quite humorous, but we don't have time for my jokes about it. But eventually she just says, I accept these terms, that if I turn my back on you, your people will kill my family, but if I help you, my family will get out safe. And so they set up this movement. The Lord then, with the Ark of the Covenant and the 12 tribes moving across, spreads the Jordan. And the Israelites cross through that water. And it gets to a point where the Ark of the Covenant's in the middle, and it's clearing the water, and there's these stones, and Joshua sends a person from each tribe back to grab a huge stone. And that's where we pick this up in chapter 4, verse 4. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each tribe of Israel. He told them, go in the middle of the Jordan, in front of the Ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder. 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? And you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever. We have a few memorials around here because God has done some incredibly significant things in the story of Briercrest, in his story that he's written through Briercrest. And when I drive in, I believe if you know Natalie or Nigel, the Mullins have a little game when they drive into town called Who Sees the Chapel First, and their kids yell as soon as they can see it through the fields. And now my kids, I'm like, we're not playing that game. They still yell at me every time they can see it. And eventually they ask me how to say Hildebrand, and eventually they ask me, why is it called that? Why is it so big? Why can't we skateboard in here? And I give them all the reasons. And they ask me why it is that certain things are what they are around here. And that's something that I take for granted at this point. I've been a student here since I was a student in '98 in high school. And then on through college, I ducked out for a few years and then came back, and I've been here since '05. And do you think as I walk through the Swenson wing, as I walk through the Bud wing, as I think about living in Glen Manor or living in Elyson or living in LA in my years here, do I think about who those people were, not in my day-to-day? And so I wanted to pause for a few minutes today and talk about the very origins of this. It's been 87 years since this became a school, but over 100 years ago, there's this story that Henry Hildebrand, Dr. Hildebrand, tells in his memoirs that I think is significant to a point that I told my wife, sure feels like I'm going to cry today in this chapel, and I'm going to do my best to fight it off. But let me read for you a little bit of our history. So this will be a little bit of story time and a little bit of reading, but really significant story. So if you jump to a couple slides there, I've got this quote from one of the chapters from Dr. Hildebrand, and he says this: "The saints at Briercrest were unique. Our people were genuine, and they expected you to be likewise a most reasonable requirement." If you don't know part of his story, Henry was from Ukraine, Russia. He immigrated over. He's in Manitoba. He gets called by the people of Briercrest, the town of Briercrest, to come be their pastor for this church that had started, and with the vision of launching a Bible school one day. And when he arrived, this is some of his assessment, that they were genuine and that they expected you to be likewise. Then he says this: "They were also unique in their gender. Beginning with the ladies' home Bible study, the original assembly was comprised mostly of women well instructed in the scriptures. In fairness to historical accuracy, Briercrest Bible College, our name when his memoirs were written, owes a great debt to the Christian women of Briercrest, the town of Briercrest." And here's why he says that. Next slide. Whew. I got to work some jokes in and get the Holy Spirit's tears out of me through some joking instead. Annie Hillson's story is represented through a memorial stone of sorts, because there's a whole dorm. There's a whole dorm that's built in her name. But listen to this. So this is a school teacher from Ontario. She moves out to Briercrest, takes this school that's just outside of the town. She had tried to go overseas to be a missionary. She was denied that request because of not having a companion to go with. This was the early 1900s. And so instead moved to the town of Briercrest and started to teach. She married a local man there, Walter Hillson, and her name went from Annie Copeland to Annie Hillson. I hope, later in life, I've got 2 daughters. One's 10. She's like quiet and gentle and cute. I've got a 5-year-old who's also cute, and she's just wild and really aggressive, and we put her in hockey. So I hope that helps her. And she got my hair, and she's got most of my personality, and that's a shame for her. I hope though that they're both reflected upon by people who get to know them like this. Annie was high-spirited. Why am I crying? I don't know, man. It's hard to know. It's hard to know what's deep within me. We'll see a counselor at some point. High-spirited, strong-minded, and well-taught in the scriptures. If that could be told about any of us, that would be great. So that's Annie. Started a Sunday school in her school. That led to a united church being born in the town of Briercrest, where she taught faithfully the scriptures and the Bible clearly. And then Henry says this in the next slide: "Opposition by the liberal wing of the church would not accept her clear Bible teaching of the gospel, so she withdrew from that congregation." If you go to the next slide, she started visiting a friend in that time named Mrs. Fraser. Mrs. Fraser was confined to her home, arthritic, and couldn't get out, and she started going there to study the Bible with her. And Mrs. Fraser suggested at some point, hey, more women would probably benefit from this and would probably come if we invited them. So they did, and more ladies did come. And the home Bible study at Briercrest, this ladies' Bible study, was started. Eventually, Mr. Sinclair Whittaker, of course, of the dorm fame, he also left the United Church when his evangelical teaching was rejected once again. And he joined them, and a small evangelical church was established. The Briercrest Gospel Assembly comprised mostly of converts through Annie Hillson's home Bible study. Strong-willed, strong-minded, high-spirited, and well-taught in the scriptures leads to these seeds for these two different churches in this town. And the next slide has a picture. This is Isabel Whittaker in front of the Gospel Assembly after it had established. This next quote, I think, is really interesting from Henry. The young church had a fine blend of people. This is him, again, arriving later and then reflecting on what he found at this gospel assembly. The young church had a fine blend of people. Some Easterners, some Westerners, some from central Canada, some Americans. The church included farmers as well as professional people, educators, businessmen, members of the Legislative Assembly in Regina. But they all had one thing in common. They loved the Lord and they loved his word. This was the common bond that drew them together. And if that doesn't sound a bit like what we have here right now, it's a pretty good description. Well, we've got people from all over, and we are studying a whole range of different things. And we've got all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of different futures and callings. You think about our 87 years of alumni, well over 22,000 alumni have gone into these areas to serve the Lord, well taught in the scriptures. And I'm sure some of them high-spirited and strong-minded. But they had that one thing in common. They loved the Lord and they loved his word. And to this day, this place and these three schools stand for these things. That the word of the Lord shall stand forever. It's on our sign. It's on the outside of the building. Again, I'm just really, really proud to be a part of a place that has not drifted from that. That is still committed to the original, committed to the original things that drew Annie to not give up. After the first church said, we don't want the Bible taught that much. And when she was just helping an old friend understand the Bible led to something very different. So, next slide. The church, the Gospel Assembly called and convinced Henry Hildebrand to join them. He was young, 21-ish, and as their pastor with dreams of starting a Bible school. But, and this might be my favorite part of the story, and this is where we're getting near the end here of chapel. In 1935, the men of the church determined that they were not ready to start the Bible school and suspended the idea indefinitely. And Annie Hillson and Isabel Whittaker asked, I spelled Isabel wrong, I believe. Isabel Whittaker asked for a meeting with Henry Hildebrand. And let me just read you an excerpt of this. This is, I think, awesome. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Hillson phoned. This is Dr. Hildebrand writing. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Hillson phoned asking for an appointment. She and Mrs. Whittaker wanted to see me about a very important matter. At 2 o'clock, the last Thursday in September, these two godly women came to see me. After a few formalities, Mrs. Hillson came to the point, her chin quivering a bit, a sign that she was deeply agitated. Isabel phoned this morning and said that the news was not so good. You men have decided to not go ahead with the Bible classes. Is that correct? Yes, I replied. That's true. Are you sure you have the mind of the Lord? We think so, I replied. Why? I don't know if she said it that way. I like to think of it that way. Why? She asked. Because we were unable to get the right man to lead the school, Henry tried to explain. Him and Sinclair had a different man, a certain young man, is all this says, that they wanted to come lead the school. And when that young man said, no, I don't think so, they said, well, let's pause this whole movement indefinitely. And in that time, you're in the Great Depression, you're into just before the war, like, does this place start if they suspended indefinitely? I don't know. And because we were not able to get the right man to lead the school, then Annie Hillson retorted, we have the right man. We prayed for the right man for a number of years, and God answered our prayer and brought you to us. You are God's man for us. We will stand behind you in prayer, and we will give you all the help we possibly can. I began to respond favorably. For I wanted the backing and prayers of these godly women who I highly respected. Will you men reconsider? Asked Mrs. Hillson. Together we committed to the all-important question to the Lord. As they left, Mrs. Whittaker gave me the counsel that I have often sought to follow. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. I was left pondering the issue. The women were committed. The men would likely go along, but what about the young people? Would anyone have sufficient confidence in me to enroll? So it goes to a service. After the service, Odd Brigman, if you live in Brigman, this is your dude. Odd Brigman edged up and shyly said, I hear we may open the Bible school after all. Depends, I replied. Will anyone want to enroll and study with me? Sure, came back his spontaneous answer. I will. So will I, answered Reg Glenn. If you're in Glen Manor, that's your guy, who had moved closer. And so will others, they assured me. Armed with this response, I went once more to the Lord, pleading, but what and how can I teach? I love to teach thy word, but I'm not trained to organize and lead a Bible school. And the Lord assured me that he required nothing more of me than to pass on the things I learned from the Bible at home, at church, and in Bible school. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. 2 Timothy. Now fully assured in my own heart, I had one concern. Would the men reconsider? Well, they did. The decision was made to go ahead to the Bible school that fall. I made one request of them, that they would consider my youthful inexperience and pray for me. A house for classes and residence was rented for $5 a month, known as the Nichols House. Several had indicated they wanted to enroll, but Monday, October 19th, registration day would be the test. It was a bleak, cloudy, blistery day with snow flurries on and off. The house was spick and span, the rooms were furnished, and I had moved in to take possession of one of the bedrooms. The first registrant was Percy Hazelhurst, about twice my age. Like, if that's not the greatest name you've ever heard in your life, I need to figure out a way to make Percy famous around here. Can we rename the Cougar mascot? I don't know. I'll think about it. Percy Hazelhurst, twice my age. Others followed and settled in that day. Tuesday morning, we opened the school with 11 eager, enthusiastic students. The faculty was more apprehensive in those days than they were the students. Mrs. Hillson and Mrs. Whittaker assisted me, along with other experienced teachers who had diligently studied the Bible. Jean Whittaker, with an ARCT in piano, taught music, and Margaret Rusk, also a teacher by profession, taught English and doubled as the secretary-treasurer. The five of us led this infant school. And if you look at this picture, you can see the first class, the 36 student body. And you can see the one-man teacher there. Well, this is actually in the second semester, and some other dude joined, McMillan. He's a good dude too, not part of the story. And in the first semester, it was Hildebrand and 4 women that were the faculty. 2 of the women we could hold responsible for pushing these men to actually start this thing. And behind them, you can see this little house, unstately, little rural Saskatchewan house called the Nichols House. They rent it for $5 a month. And we want to hang on to this story as a memorial stone, because what God's done through that interaction, through that exchange, through the strong-mindedness and high-spiritedness of Annie, through the words of Isabel in that interaction, through their teaching, their willingness to uphold in prayer and to support and to teach. We want to hang on to this story. So some of these photos are going to show up in that space in between the library and the academic services, where those new tables are, where those old couches were that I got out of there. It's too much cuddling, but we've talked about that. There's too much going on up there. So it's now more public study space. And there'll be lots of pictures show up around those tables of what God's doing now, of you guys, of pictures of our students lately, last year or two, so that we can show people that walk through what God's doing here, the story that he's writing now. But along the hallway, eventually, the next couple weeks, you'll see this photo, and a photo of the house itself, and that photo we showed of Isabel and the Gospel Assembly. and a photo of the Yale Hotel that they buy 2 years later. So that we can tell people, this is what God's done. This is a miraculous moment in our history that has led to 87 years, 2 more schools, a completely winding and crazy journey of this institution where God's hand has led, where all along the way the people loved the word of the Lord and they loved studying it and they committed to these things all along the way. You know, one of the things we say in recruitment when we're comparing against other Christian universities is just look at our Bible and Theo, look at our core, the core classes that are on all your program sheets in the college. Look at our Christian ethics program in the high school. We take this seriously here. And it stands out to people as very different than other schools that look like us because these things are still so important to us. And for you today, for you and I, we enter into this story way later. We're right on the coattails of these people. And 22,000 other people have. And so in Alumni Week this week, we have some opportunities to hear from a few people that have come before us just a few years ago, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, to hear what their story is, of how God has used this place to send them out, and how we are a part of that story now. And so the seminars tomorrow afternoon that Kevin was telling you about, there's this one with Adam Driscoll and Lori Peters and Todd Faulkner and Grace Nation. You've got people in education and secondary education, primary, secondary education, in higher education. Also, Lori was an all-Canadian basketball player we saw on social a little while ago, so that we can ask questions there. Todd Faulkner's been in sales for most of his life, and he's just taken the director job at Dallas Valley and coming out of business into ministry. And Grace is around you. Many of you know Grace. There's lots of stories there that we want to explore a little bit, just in an hour and a bit tomorrow. And then in the next slide there, Kevin's going to interview these people, a few people that lived here long ago, Leighton and Jory and Hannah Ukrainitz, who you would know as Jesse's sister at this point. And they're going to dive into a lot of some of the practical details, all stemming off of this story that God's written over the last 100 years. And so that space upstairs, I think, will be just like a little nook of the school, you know what I mean? But it'll help tie together a few of the major memorial stones we have around here. The name on this building, the name on the Hillson dorm, the name on the Whittaker's dorm, the name on Brigman, the name on all kinds of the Glen Manor dorm. All these buildings have such significant stories of God's faithfulness and people who answered the call and provided a future so that you and I could show up here and one day say, we're an alumni of this place. We're part of that story. And it's not ours. This isn't Annie's story. This is the story of God's faithfulness in using a faithful woman of God. And I've been around here for a long time, in your perspective. I mean, if Ken Ginter's here, not that long, I don't mean to offend. But I've rarely heard this story of these great, great women who paved the way for this place. This is an easy, quick read. And there is gold in it about who we are and the place you chose to come to. And there's lots of copies around. You can come take this one if you want. But it's in the library. As soon as Blackaby returns it to the library, it's in the library. There's a bunch on a random bookshelves around school. There's a lot of these in a box somewhere. You'd be wise, if some of this is inspiring, you'd be wise to take a peek in this book. Read through some of the chapters. Look at some of the pictures. Same with Win in the Wheat Fields. Same with Miracle on the Prairies. What God did here was so significant and came out of nowhere. I mean, one of the things he says there is it's a small little town in the middle of Saskatchewan, the least populated provinces in Canada and far away from the cities. You'd never think that God would create something here. And when people visit Briercrest, they say, how did this even happen? They still say that, actually, whenever we walk them through and they see this place. And you and I get to be a part of that story. And so this week, we wanted to draw some attention. This morning, we wanted to draw some attention. And moving forward, we'll see a little bit more of that. Of course, after the Nichols House and after this era, you can see our history on the timeline in the Crossroads area there. And that's important. Already, it becomes a little bit of background to us. But each of those 16 moments was really important, and God did such incredible things along the way. And if all of us might be inspired by Annie's story, I think we might just find a bit more resolve to deal with the type of things that she went through. The liberal wing of the church coming at us for believing the scriptures the way we do. The discouragement when people leave and we're left with doing the right thing and yet everybody else thinking otherwise. Or when the people that you love dearly and are committed to are taking an easier or more cautious way out, and yet you feel within it you that the Lord is saying you got to say something. She's such an inspiring story. And without her, I'm not sure we sit here today. So let's go into our day knowing that we are part of such a significant story that God has written over the last 87 years, and that we get to be a part of the chapter that he's writing right now. And let's thank him for that and engage with some of our alumni and some of the things that are happening here this weekend. Let me pray. Father, thank you so much for choosing this place, for blessing this place. For being faithful to the faithful followers back in the 20s and 30s that gave way to this institution. We thank you that we get to join the tens of thousands of people who have also sat in this chapel on this campus, back in the Briercrest campus, and being a part of a people that are shaped by the scriptures for lives of service. And Lord, that we might be faithful to that we might be receptive to that we might learn your word, your scriptures so well that we go into our various callings in different industries to change this world, to bring them into relationship with you, to be light into darkness. For we know that the word of the Lord will stand forever. And Lord, may we pattern our lives after the examples of Annie and Isabel and Henry and Sinclair and these memorial stones we have around campus, that they would remind us of this story. In your name I pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. I didn't cry as much as I thought I would. This is the go in peace to love and serve the Lord.